overhead is that we're going to want to make sure that we recognize that labor and overhead, that's our conversion. And so we're going to have a beginning conversion balance of 40,000. We don't actually do materials, labor, and overhead all separately. It's materials and conversion costs when we're doing our process costing. And so that means that for the amount that was added, again, it's going to be labor plus our overhead. So for our costs added in the problem, we have 100,000 plus that 270, so it's going to be 370,000 there. And so step one in any problem is to get the units completed and transferred out. But we already have that. It was given to us at 370,000. So if we didn't have that, if it had given us start, if it had given us end, and like what we were doing previously, we might have to solve for it. Step two is to get the equivalent units of output, of production. So our equivalent units of production, doesn't matter whether we're going to be looking at our direct materials or that conversion, it's going to be the same. We're going to look at what we completed and transferred out. So that is stuff that's 100% done, okay? We did it, it's all done. But what we also did was some stuff that isn't totally finished, and that's our ending inventory. So we're going to add to this. So while that completed and transferred out is 100% done, we can count it as whole units. Our ending inventory, we're going to work with as equivalent units. Because if we have, let's say, 10,000 units, but they're only 70% done, we're going to count that as 7,000 equivalently done units, like whole units here. So our completed and transferred out, it was given to us at our 370. And so that's going to be true for both departments. And our ending work in progress was 50,000 units that said it was 60% complete with respect to conversion costs. So it tells us that our conversion costs here, that this applies, that it's 60% done. And with the direct materials, though, we want to keep in mind that it is our, as soon as we started the process, the materials were added at the beginning, which means that even if there's 50,000 items sitting in our ending inventory, they're going to be 100% complete with respect to direct materials because we added that as soon as we started making them. And so when we look at our equivalent ending units, that's going to be that 50,000 for our direct materials. But for our conversion costs, it's going to be that 50,000 times 0.6. So it's going to be our 30,000 there. And so this gives us the equivalent units of production. So this is what we actually created. This is what we actually created in terms of, in this period. So in terms of direct materials, we ended up producing 420,000 units, and in terms of those conversion costs, it was 400,000. And so before we can even get to that cost of goods transferred out, because in order to do our total costs of goods transferred out, what we need is the per unit cost that we're going to multiply by the number of units that we completed and transferred out. But in order to get the per unit cost, we have to figure out what our total cost is. So that's what comes next, is figuring out what the total cost, and we often refer to this as the total cost to be accounted for. Because we actually know what these costs are. They're up above. It's just that we're trying to reallocate them from what we're going to have right here to our direct materials and our conversion costs, so then we can take them and put them into what's been transferred out and what's left in our work in progress inventory. So for our total cost to be accounted for, we're always going to take our beginning inventory value and we're going to add to it whatever costs were added. And that's going to give us that total cost. Because our goal is to divide by the number of equivalent units to end up with that cost per equivalent unit. And so that is usually our step 4. But I'm just trying to map out for you where we're trying to go here so that when you're looking at this, right, you kind of know what the goal is. And so we do this for both departments. We do it for direct materials and we do it for our conversion. So our beginning inventory for direct materials is what? Trying to give you a breather so you can get caught up, see where we're at. What is our beginning inventory for our materials here when we read through this problem? What do you think? 20,000, exactly, right? It gave us that beginning for materials, and what we have to do for that conversion is make sure that we're using the labor plus the overhead. So that direct materials for our, beginning inventory is going to be 20,000, and for our conversion costs, it is 40,000. The costs added, those are in the second part there. It said that we added 211,000 in terms of materials, and then it said that we added 100,000 and 270,000, 100,000 for labor, 270 for overhead. So the total conversion cost that we're adding there is 370. And we can calculate that total cost under materials and conversion. So we've got our 231 and we've got our 410,000 there. And so our equivalent units, we found those above, right? For direct materials, we produced in this period in which we've incurred this, we're actually including the beginning inventory, but we're talking about we've incurred this 231,000 to make 420,000 units. So we're going to divide by that 420,000, and it's going to give us a cost per unit of 55 cents. For our conversion costs, we spent $410,000 in order to make 400,000 units, okay? And so we're going to divide that by that 400,000. And this is going to give us a cost of 1.025. So we have that cost per equivalent unit for our direct materials and for conversion costs. The total cost is just going to be the sum of those two. We're not done yet. The goal here is to figure out the cost of goods transferred out. And the cost of goods transferred out is whatever our per unit cost is times the number completed and transferred out. We know the number completed and transferred out. It was 370. We've done all of this work because we needed to know that total cost per equivalent unit. Okay, that was the goal here. So on our next page there, I'm going to continue on with this. So it asks us, So we're going to figure out that cost transferred out, and then we're also going to do the journal entry for it. And so that cost transferred out, that number of units completed times the cost per equivalent unit. And so we know that the number of units completed and transferred out, just to be super clear there. So the number of units completed and transferred out, that was that 370,000, and the cost that we have of production is this 1.575, which gives me a cost here of 582,750. And one of the things that we have to pay attention here is that this was the first process, okay? So we're talking about goods being transferred from this blending process to the curing process. So when we're talking about the actual journal entry to make this happen, where it asks us, well, what's the appropriate journal entry to do this? We're not transferring into finished goods. If we were the last process, we'd be transferring into finished goods. Since we're not the last process, we're transferring into that work in progress of the curing department. So that work in progress for our blending, right? We're transferring out of that, and we're going to put it into the work of process of that curing department. Right? That's the point of our process costing, is that we're going from one process to the next process. So if we're going to do this in terms of journal entries, right, our work in process for that blending, we're going to credit that, and it's going to that work in process of the curing department when we transfer out those units. If it was the last process, we'd be going to our finished goods inventory. But it's not the last process, so we're going into that next process. Questions on that so far? So then it asks us, what's the ending balance of our work in process blending account? What we're actually being asked here to do, guys, is when it comes to that reconciliation of our costs, right? When we're trying to reconcile and we have those costs that need to be charged, what we end up having is that cost of things transferred out and then the value of that ending work in progress. They're just making us do this reconciliation piece by piece. So when you don't have to formally do a reconciliation for UHO's course, you pretty much have to do it, you just don't have to write it in the exact same way. Okay, it's still the same type of content. And so for our ending balance work in progress, we want to just keep in mind that in general, what it's going to be is our ending inventory, but in terms of equivalent units. How many whole units do we have there, basically? Times the cost per equivalent unit. But you can't do this work in progress or the ending balance as one thing. So we could do the cost transferred out as one calculation. I didn't have to do the cost transferred out of materials and the cost transferred out of conversion separately, because it was the same number of units completed and transferred out for both, because it was both 370. So I didn't have to go 370 times 0.55 and 370 times 1.025. It's the same thing as me just multiplying by that sum. But because the ending units equivalent units are going to be different numbers, 50,000 and 30,000, we have to do this work in progress ending balance separately for each one. So whenever we're looking at our ending balance, we have that equation written out there already. So for our direct materials ending balance, we want that number of equivalent units. And so if we go back to what we did in A, because it's 100% complete and there's 50,000 left in inventory, it's going to be that 50,000. And our cost per equivalent unit we found to be 55 cents. And so this is going to give us a value of 27,500. And for our conversion costs, our ending balance the equivalent units for conversion is only 30,000, right? It was 50,000 at 60% complete, and the cost there was 1.025. And so this is going to give us a cost of 30,750. And so our total ending balance there is 58,250. Questions on that so far? So again, while you do not actually have to do a formal reconciliation if you're in UHO section, it is pretty much just pulling together these two things. So on the next page, it asks us to compare a cost reconciliation. All we're going to do is take the costs that we know that we have and the costs that we allocated. So all this is, guys, is just a few lines long, is that we're going to take the costs to be accounted for, and that's what we already basically did, right? It's our beginning work in progress plus the costs that are added, but we just do it all together. So that beginning work in progress, it was 20,000 for our direct materials and 40,000 for conversion. So we're just going to use 60,000. The costs added, it was 211,000 for our materials and 370 for that conversion. So our 581,000. And so our total cost there is 641,000. If you go back to that step 3, you can it's the same thing as that total cost. If you added these two up, right, you're going to get that 641,000. They're going to be the same number there on page 32. Same total cost. It's just the cost that we have and the cost that we accounted for. So we have what we transferred out, and we already calculated this, but I'm just going to rewrite it just so we've got it. That 370,000 times 1.575 to get us that 582,750, right? That was our completed units, and how much did they cost us to give us that 582? And then we are going to add to that our ending work in progress. And so for materials, as we just did, that was 50,000 times 0.55. And for our conversion, it was that 30,000 times 1.025. And if you didn't make any mistakes, you've got the same total costs under each one. Questions there? Oh, you're all beautiful souls. So, as I said earlier, I am in Dunning from 6:30 to 9:30 tomorrow, Friday. And I am in Matt Quarry, D122 from 2 to 4 on Sunday. So if you have any questions, feel free to come chat. We'll go from there.